Hello everyone, welcome to the task 7 of week 2. In this task, the aim is pretty simple. We have to write a program to calculate the sum and average of three numbers. Okay, so basically here the user enters three numbers and we have to find out the sum and average of those three numbers. Okay, so let's quickly switch back to our editor. Save this file as task 7. Okay, and take the template, take the aim and the author, and let's begin. Okay, so here now you have to write a program to calculate sum and average, right? So first of all, you have to take three inputs from the user where the numbers will be stored, and then we have to find out the sum of those three numbers and then the average. So basically you need three variables to store the numbers, one variable to store the sum, and one variable to store the average. Okay, so now this can be done using float, or you can do it using integer, and even using double. Okay, so I will be using let's say integer. Okay, so I will be using integer for the numbers. Let's say n1, n2 and n3. These are the three numbers, right? Since the three numbers are integer, the sum is also going to be integer, so let's declare that also, right? And now let's think about the average. Now if I declare a average as integer, there will be a slight problem, because because the formula for the average would be sum of these three numbers divided by 3, and if the number is divided by 3, so whenever there is a division, there is a chance of getting a decimal point. Okay, so it's always better to have the average or any decimal values to be declared as float. Okay, so let's take it as float average. Okay, so we have total 5 variables. 3 is going to store the numbers, 1 to store sum, and 1 to store average. Okay, you could have easily taken everything as float. Okay, so that would also be fine. Okay, but in my case I'm taking it as integer, the numbers as integer, for a special reason. I will let you know why I've used this in a later point. Okay, so let's begin. So first of all, always remember, whenever you write a program, the user should know what this program is going to do, right? So I will just start with that. I will just write let's say it says sum and average finder. Okay, so that is the program. Okay, so now we will begin. Now first step is to take the input. Now here the order of the sequence, that means I have two ways of taking the input. I can use one scanf to take all the three inputs, or I can use three different scanf to take the three inputs. Okay, so which one to use completely depends on the type of the variable. Okay, so in our case, if you remember, in the previous case also we had taken three inputs, right? But the difference was there, all the three inputs were different, right? So the principal, the rate of interest, and the years, so they cannot be interchanged. So if the user enters it in a different pattern or a different order, the complete program goes haywire, right? But in this particular case, it doesn't matter which number is entered first. Okay, so let's say the user enters the first number last. Okay, so the first number is entered last, so it doesn't matter, the sum is going to remain the same. So in such cases, I can always go I can always take the input using single scanf. That will make my life much easier. Okay, so I will just start like this. I will do scanf, then I will do %d, then 3% d's, and then the number of %d should match the number of variables that comes after the comma. Okay, so since you have added 3% d's, so after the comma there should be 3 variables. Okay, so I would start with and n1, then and n2, and then and n3. Okay, so the first %d data will be stored in n1, the second will be stored in n2, and the third will be stored in n3, and all these three will be separated by space. Okay, so this is the formatted input string. Okay, so now if it is not necessary that this should be a space. Okay, you could even use, let's say, comma over here, right? You could use comma, or in fact you can use any separator that you want, right? So let's decide go for comma. Okay, so the user has to enter 3 variables separated by comma. Okay, so now this the user must know, right? To make them understand, we will always add a printf statement just above the scanf, which would tell what is the type format in which they have to enter the data. Okay, so enter 3 numbers. Okay, separated by comma. Okay, so I will just give them an hint. Okay, so this is just a hint for the user, and once I have the 3 numbers with me, I can easily find out sum. Sum is nothing but n1 plus n2 plus n3, and I can display the value printf. So the sum is equal to, now here the type of variable of sum is integer. So here if I want to insert that over here, I have to use %d, and then after the quotes I will put a comma and just write the name of the variable. Okay, so this finishes with the sum part of the program. Okay, so after running this, I would get the sum of 3 numbers. I will just add these 3 and press enter. You can see the sum is 9. Okay, perfect. Now just before we go to finding the average, I would like to show you what happens if by chance you forget to add this ampersand sign. Okay, so let's suppose you forgot to add this ampersand sign over here, and just look at it, what happens. Okay, so if I run this and if I press anything, comma, if I press enter, can you see what has happened? Okay, so the process returned some value other than 0. Okay, so if something like this has occurred, or if the program crashes, okay, so if the program quits suddenly, then you should understand that this problem occurs whenever you have forgotten to add the ampersand sign in the scanf. Okay, so always remember, whenever your program crashes, as soon as you put some values into your program, it means you have forgotten to add the ampersand sign in the scanf. Okay, so so that is out of the way. Now let's find out the average. Okay, so average, the formula for average is basically, now I could do again do the addition and then divide by 3, or I can simply use the value of sum, because I have already calculated it, and divided by 3. Okay, so this will give me the average value. So the average, I will just find average is, now percentage d will not work because the type of the variable data type of average is float, so this should be percentage f and this should be average. Okay, so now if I run it, it would work, right? 3 4 5. If I okay, let's first take 2 2 and 2. Okay, so I have taken 3 2's. If I press enter, so the sum is 6 and 6 divided by 3 is the average is 2. Perfect. Okay, so but let's take a value something like this. Let's say 3 3 and 1. Okay, so just look at this. The value of sum is 7 and the average is 2. So if you divide 7 by 3, what is the value that you get? It is 2 point something, right? So that means the after decimal places, even though we have selected float, you're not getting the answer correctly, right? That is because whenever you do and whenever you divide an integer with an integer, you will always get the output as integer. Okay, so basically the funda is very simple. You whenever you add or subtract or divide or multiply an integer, you will always get the output as integer. Okay, so now the problem is the sum is an integer, right? And 3 is again an integer. So whatever is this division will always give you an integer, right? So even though the division was fraction, okay, so it was like 2 point something, right? But then only 2 gets stored in the average. Okay, so it doesn't matter what type of variable over here it is going to be, like even if it was float or double, it would not get the value the decimal places, because the result of integer divided by integer will be always integer. Okay, so now how to resolve this problem? There are two ways to resolve this. Okay, so the first way is to make one of them float. Okay, so to make one of them float is the first way. The second way is to cheat a little bit. Now how to cheat is basically you have to as I said, you have to make one of them float, right? So if I just do 3.0, okay, so if I just do 3.0, what happens is both of them are converted to float, because one of them is float. Float is a higher data type, so every operation will be converted into a higher data type and then performed, right? So since float is there, so sum will also be converted into float, and then the operation will be done and the result will be stored into average. So this is one way of doing it. So if I just run it again, and if I write, let's say 3 4 1, you can see I get the result 2.6667. okay, this is one way. Another way is to cast the variable to float. Okay, to convert this sum into float. To do that, you can simply use typecasting. So how to do typecasting is you can convert any data type into any data type by just prefixing it with this round brackets and specifying the type of the variable you want. Okay, so basically sum is integer, but you want this to be float, so you just write float over here. So now what happens is this sum is converted to float with this command, and then it's being divided, right? But since float, one of the operations is float, so this also will be converted to float and the result will be perfect again. So 3 4 1, if I enter, I get the same result again. Okay, so these are the two ways of doing it. Now if you have seen, there is a slight problem with the new line. So after the sum, after this percentage d, I could have added a slash backslash n, so that the average comes in a new line. So finally if I run it this time, if I take 3, 3 and 1, if I enter, you can see the sum is 7 and the average is 2.333. okay. And as a final step, since this is a floating value and I don't want such high precision, I can always restrict the precision by specifying the precision value. okay. So now if I run it one last time, let's say 4, 4 and 1, you can see I get sum as 9 and average as 3.0, only 3 decimal places. okay. I hope you have got the concept of casting from this particular experiment. See you in the next video.